It was a cold, damp evening when Detective Clara Hayes received the call that would change everything. The rain had been falling steadily all day, turning the streets of the small town into shimmering mirrors under the dim glow of streetlights. Clara had just finished her shift at the precinct and was about to head home when the phone rang. On the other end was a voice, shaky, hesitant, but insistent. A man, claiming to be an anonymous caller, said he had stumbled upon something strange in the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. He refused to give his name or provide many details, only muttering something about a grave that didn't belong there. Clara sighed as she grabbed her coat. Anonymous tips were common in her line of work, and most of them turned out to be nothing more than wild goose chases. But something about this one felt different. The caller's tone wasn't dramatic or exaggerated like those looking for attention. Instead, it carried a quiet urgency that made her uneasy. She decided to check it out even if it meant braving the stormy weather. The cemetery was located far from the main roads, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow the light from Clara's car headlights. As she drove along the narrow, winding path leading to the site, the rain pounded against her windshield, making visibility nearly impossible. When she finally arrived, the place looked eerily abandoned. Tombstones stood crookedly, some broken, or covered in moss while overgrown weeds swallowed the pathways whole. It was the kind of place people avoided, especially after dark. Clara parked her car near the entrance and stepped out, pulling her coat tighter around her to shield herself from the biting wind. Her boots crunched against the wet gravel as she made her way deeper into the graveyard. She carried a flashlight in one hand and a notebook in the other, scanning the area carefully. At first glance, everything seemed normal, or as normal as an old, neglected cemetery could be. But then she saw it. A freshly dug patch of earth marked by a simple wooden cross sticking out of the ground. This wasn't part of the regular burial plots. It looked hastily done, almost as though someone had buried something here in secret. Curiosity tugged at her instincts. Clara knelt beside the mound of dirt and examined it closely. The soil was loose and damp, clearly disturbed recently. Whoever had done this hadn't bothered to cover their tracks properly. She called for backup immediately, knowing she'd need help to dig it up safely. While waiting for her team to arrive, she took a few moments to observe the surroundings. Something about the atmosphere felt off, not necessarily dangerous, but unsettling. The air was heavy, as though the storm clouds above weren't the only things weighing down the world. Every sound, the rustling leaves, the distant rumble of thunder, seemed amplified, pressing against her ears like whispers trying to break through. When her colleagues finally arrived, they wasted no time setting up floodlights and beginning the excavation process. Clara watched silently as shovels dug into the soft earth, revealing a plain wooden coffin beneath. It was smaller than usual, almost child-sized, which struck her as odd. Coffins like these weren't typically used for adult burials. But the real surprise came when they pried open the lid. Inside, instead of human remains, lay a collection of strange metallic objects. They were shaped like flat discs, each etched with intricate patterns that glimmered faintly in the harsh light. The symbols were unlike anything Clara had ever seen before, swirling lines and sharp angles that seemed to twist and shift when viewed from different angles. "What is this?" one of the officers muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I don't know," Clara replied, her brow furrowed in thought. "But we're going to find out." As they examined the artifacts more closely, an odd sensation began to creep over the group. The temperature dropped suddenly, despite the warmth of the floodlights. Their breaths formed visible clouds in the air, and a faint hum filled the silence, a low, droning noise that seemed to emanate from the discs themselves. Some of the officers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to laugh off the strangeness or take it seriously. Clara, however, couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something far bigger, and potentially far darker, than they realized. She reached out cautiously, her gloved fingers brushing against the surface of one of the discs. It felt cold, unnaturally so, as though it had been sitting in ice for hours. Just as she pulled her hand back, The disk emitted a soft pulse of light, startling everyone. For a brief second, the entire cemetery was bathed in an eerie glow, casting long shadows across the graves. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the light faded, leaving behind an oppressive stillness. "This isn't right," one of the younger officers whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "We should leave." Clara hesitated, torn between agreeing with him and following protocol. Whatever these objects were, they clearly didn't belong here. Taking them away for further investigation seemed like the logical next step. But as she gave the order to pack them up, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach, that perhaps opening this particular Pandora's box would lead to consequences none of them were prepared to face. Still, duty called, and Clara knew she couldn't walk away now. Little did she know the decision to take those artifacts would set off a chain of events that would haunt her and the entire town for years to come. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. The metallic discs, carefully wrapped and placed in evidence bags, sat on a table in the lab under harsh fluorescent lights. Forensic experts huddled around them, their faces etched with confusion as they examined the strange objects. Clara stood nearby, arms crossed, watching intently. She had expected answers by now, some explanation for what these things were, but instead the mystery only deepened. The first thing the team noticed was how the discs seemed to resist analysis. They weren't made of any known metal. Attempts to scratch or cut them failed entirely. Even the most advanced tools in the lab couldn't leave so much as a mark on their smooth surfaces. Stranger still, the symbols engraved into the discs appeared to shift when viewed from different angles. One moment they looked like intricate geometric patterns. The next, they resembled ancient runes. No one could agree on what language, if it even was a language, they represented. As hours passed, more peculiarities emerged. Electronic devices near the discs began malfunctioning without warning. Cell phones would lose signal, computers crashed mid-task, and the lights flickered. Sporadically. At first, everyone chalked it up to faulty wiring or equipment failure, but the coincidences piled up too quickly to ignore. Then came the sounds. Low, faint vibrations that seemed to emanate from the artifacts themselves. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming at first, just a subtle hum that buzzed in the background like white noise. But the longer you listened, the harder it became to tune out. Clara spent most of her evening in the lab, poring over notes and consulting with specialists. She called in Dr. Evelyn Carter, a linguistics expert who specialized in deciphering ancient scripts. When Evelyn arrived, she studied the symbols with fascination, her brow furrowed in concentration. After several minutes, she shook her head, slowly. "These aren't like anything I've seen before," she admitted. "But there's something unsettling about them, like they're trying to communicate." Her words sent a chill down Clara's spine. Communicate? With whom? And why? The question swirled in her mind, unanswered and growing heavier with each passing hour. Exhausted but unwilling to leave, Clara decided to stay late to review the case files once more. The precinct was quiet now, the usual bustle of officers, and staff replaced by an eerie stillness. Only the soft hum of the air conditioner broke the silence. Or so she thought. At first, Clara didn't notice the change. She was focused on the stack of papers in front of her, jotting down observations and sketching rough diagrams of the discs. But then, the lights began to flicker. At first, it was just a quick flash, barely noticeable. Then the flickering grew, more erratic, casting the room into alternating shadows and brightness. Clara frowned and glanced up, wondering if another power surge was to blame. But this felt different. Intentional, almost. She stood up cautiously, stepping toward the door to check the main breaker. Before she could reach it, the lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Her heart skipped a beat as she fumbled for her flashlight. The beam of light illuminated the desks and chairs around her, but something felt off. The hum she'd grown accustomed to hearing throughout the day was louder now, resonating through the walls like a distant engine revving to life. Clara turned back toward the evidence table where the discs had been left earlier. Her breath caught in her throat. The artifacts were glowing faintly, pulsating with a soft, otherworldly light. She approached them slowly, her flashlight trembling in her hand. As she drew closer, the glow intensified, and the air around her grew colder. Goosebumps prickled her skin, and she realized she wasn't alone in the room anymore. Shadows danced along the walls, not ordinary shadows, but shapes that moved independently of any light source. They twisted and writhed, forming humanoid figures that loomed menacingly. Clara froze, her pulse racing. Were her eyes playing tricks on her? She blinked hard, hoping the images would disappear, but they only grew clearer. The shadowy forms stretched toward her, their movements jerky and unnatural. A low guttural sound filled the room, like whispers overlapping in a cacophony of voices. Though no one spoke, Clara heard fragments of words, phrases in languages she didn't recognize, some harsh and guttural, others melodic, yet alien. Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. "This isn't real," she muttered under her breath, clutching the flashlight tightly. "It's not real." Yet the shadows continued to advance, closing in on her until she could feel their icy presence brushing against her skin. She stumbled backward, tripping over a chair and landing hard on the floor. The impact jarred her senses, snapping her. Out of her fear-induced paralysis, summoning every ounce of courage, Clara scrambled to her feet and shouted for help. Her voice echoed through the empty halls of the precinct, but no one responded. Everyone else had already gone home for the night. Desperate, she grabbed her radio and called for backup, her fingers shaking as she pressed the button. Static crackled in response, drowning out her pleas. Whatever force was affecting the electronics extended to communication devices as well. Just as she thought things couldn't get worse, the discs began to levitate. Slowly at first, then faster, they spun in midair, emitting a high-pitched whine that pierced her ears. Clara covered them instinctively, dropping to her knees as the noise reached a deafening crescendo. The shadows converged above her, merging into a single towering figure that loomed over the room. Its shape shifted constantly, impossible to focus on for more than a second. Eyes formed within its mass, glowing red and staring directly at her. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The lights flickered back on, bathing the room in sterile white light. The discs lay motionless on the table, their glow extinguished. The shadows vanished, leaving behind only the familiar contours of the precinct. Clara sat on the floor, gasping for air, her body trembling uncontrollably. Had it all been in her head? A hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? Before she could process what had happened, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. 2 officers burst into the room, having responded belatedly to her earlier distress call. "Detective Hayes, are you okay?" one of them asked, his voice laced with concern. Clara hesitated, glancing between the men and the discs. Should she tell them what she saw? Would they believe her? For now, she chose to play it safe. "I'm fine," she said finally, forcing a weak smile. "Just tired. Must have dozed off." The officers exchanged skeptical looks but didn't press further. Instead, they helped her to her feet and offered to escort her home. Clara declined, insisting she needed to finish reviewing the case files. Once they left, she sank back into her chair, staring at the artifacts with a mixture of dread and determination. Whatever these discs were, they weren't ordinary. And whatever they had shown her tonight, it was only the beginning. As dawn approached, Clara found herself unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the whispers returned, faint but persistent, echoing in her mind. The symbols on the discs haunted her thoughts, their shifting patterns taunting her with secrets she couldn't unravel. Something had awakened, a presence, a force, and it knew she was watching. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled into a world far beyond her understanding, one where reality itself might crumble beneath the weight of the unknown. The days following the incident at the precinct felt like a blur for Clara. She tried to go about her routine, but it was impossible to shake off the unease that clung to her like a second skin. Sleep eluded her entirely. Every time she closed her eyes, the whispers returned, Faint at first, almost like background noise, but growing louder and more insistent as the nights wore on. They weren't just random sounds anymore. Now they carried meaning. Fragments of words spoken in languages she didn't recognize but somehow understood instinctively. The messages were disjointed, cryptic, yet unmistakably directed at her. At work, Clara struggled to focus. Her colleagues noticed her distracted demeanor but chalked it up to stress or overwork. She couldn't exactly blame them. How could she explain what she'd seen without sounding unhinged? Still, the weight of secrecy pressed heavily on her shoulders. Every time she passed the evidence room where the discs were stored, she felt an inexplicable pull, a magnetic force urging her closer. It took all her willpower not to give in, knowing that whatever lurked within those artifacts wasn't something she could confront alone. Desperate for answers, Clara decided to consult someone outside the department, someone who might understand the deeper implications of what she'd uncovered. A quick search led her to Dr. Marcus Reed, a local historian with a reputation for delving into obscure legends and forgotten lore. His office was tucked away in a small building downtown, cluttered with books, maps, and artifacts from various eras. When Clara arrived, he greeted her warmly, though his expression turned serious when she described the events surrounding the discs. "This isn't the first time I've heard of such things," Marcus said after examining photos of the U symbols. He adjusted his glasses thoughtfully before pulling out a dusty tome from one of the shelves. "These markings, they're connected to an ancient cult known as the Children of the Void. They believed in summoning entities from beyond our world, beings neither alive nor dead, bound by neither time nor space." Clara leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What kind of entities?" Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Think of them as shadows given form, beings of pure energy, capable of bending reality to their will. According to legend, the cult performed rituals to bring these entities into our world, hoping to gain power or knowledge. But they underestimated what they were dealing with. The entities consumed everything in their path, people, places, even memories, until there was nothing left. Eventually, the cult realized they had made a grave mistake. To contain the damage, they sealed the artifacts used in the rituals and buried them deep underground." "And you think these discs are part of that?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's possible," Marcus replied grimly. "But if they've been disturbed, we may have unleashed something far worse than we can imagine. These objects aren't just relics, they're conduits, portals, if you will, and once opened, they don't close easily." The weight of his words settled over Clara like a leaden blanket. If Marcus was right, then the strange occurrences at the precinct, the malfunctioning electronics, the shadowy figures, the whispers were only the beginning. Something far darker was awakening, and she was standing directly in its path. That night, Clara's dreams shifted. Instead of disjointed whispers, she found herself standing in a vast, desolate landscape bathed in perpetual twilight. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and barren, stretching endlessly in every direction. In the distance, towering shapes moved languidly, their forms indistinct but undeniably menacing. She wanted to run, to scream, but her body refused to obey. Then a voice spoke, not aloud but inside her mind. It was deep, resonant, and filled with malice. "You should not have awakened us." Clara jolted awake, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding wildly. The voice lingered in her thoughts, echoing long after she opened her eyes. Was it real? Had the entity reached out to her directly? Or was this some trick of her subconscious? Either way, it confirmed one thing. Whatever was happening, it wasn't confined to the physical world. This was something that transcended logic, something primal and ancient, determined to protect herself and others. Clara began researching ways to neutralize the threat. Marcus provided her with texts detailing protective wards and incantations used by the cult to control their creations. Some involved drawing specific symbols on surfaces, while others required reciting phrases in dead languages. Clara practiced them diligently, etching the runes onto pieces of paper and taping them around her apartment. At first, she felt foolish, like she was indulging in superstition rather than reason. But when the whispers grew fainter, almost hesitant, she knew she was onto something. Meanwhile, the town itself started showing signs of disturbance. Reports poured in of strange phenomena, lights flickering in homes, unexplained noises in the dead of night, and sightings of shadowy figures lurking in alleys and wooded areas. One farmer claimed his livestock had been mutilated overnight, their bodies drained of blood and marked with the same symbols engraved on the discs. Another resident reported waking up to find cryptic messages scrawled on their walls in what appeared to be ash. Clara visited each location personally, documenting everything meticulously. Each new piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. The entity or entities were spreading. Their influence was seeping into the fabric of reality, warping it slowly but surely. And wherever they went, chaos followed. One evening, while reviewing case files at her desk, Clara received a call from Officer Daniels, one of the few people she trusted implicitly. His tone was urgent. "Detective Hayes, you need to come to the station immediately. It's about the discs." Her stomach sank. "What happened?" "They're acting up again," he replied. "But this time it's different. People are saying they're hearing voices coming from the artifacts. Clear voices like the discs are talking back." Clara didn't waste a moment. Grabbing her coat, she rushed to the precinct, her mind racing with possibilities. By the time she arrived, a small crowd of officers had gathered outside the evidence room, their expressions uneasy. Daniels met her halfway down the hall. "We've quarantined the area," he explained. "No one's going in until you get here." Inside the evidence room, the scene was surreal. The discs floated mid-air, spinning rapidly, their glow brighter than ever. Officers who had dared approach reported hearing distinct voices emanating from the objects, speaking in languages none of them understood. Clara stepped cautiously into the room, her earlier wards tucked safely in her pocket. As she drew closer, the hum intensified, vibrating through her chest like a second heartbeat. Then the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't fragmented or distant. They coalesced into a single, coherent message, repeated over and over in her mind. "Release us." Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The command was clear, undeniable. But releasing whatever was trapped within the discs wasn't an option. It would mean unleashing untold destruction upon the world. Yet ignoring it came with its own risks. The entity seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, testing boundaries, probing weaknesses. How much longer could they hold it at bay? As she stood there, torn between fear and resolve, Clara realized something crucial. The entity wasn't just trying to escape. It was learning, observing, adapting. And if she didn't act soon, it might find a way to circumvent her defenses entirely. With newfound determination, Clara turned to Daniels. "I need to speak with Dr. Reed again. Tonight. There has to be a way to stop this before it's too late." Daniels nodded grimly. "Do you want backup?" "No," Clara said firmly. "This is my responsibility. I'll handle it." As she left the precinct, the weight of her decision settled heavily on her shoulders. Whatever lay ahead, she knew. It wouldn't be easy, but one thing was certain: she couldn't face the darkness alone. Clara's meeting with Dr. Marcus Reed took place in the same cluttered office where they had spoken before. But this time, the atmosphere was heavier, charged with an unspoken urgency. The historian greeted her with a grave expression, his usual, calm demeanor replaced by something closer to dread. He had clearly been expecting her call and dreading it. "I've done some digging since we last spoke," Marcus began without preamble, gesturing for Clara to sit. "If your descriptions are accurate, and I have no reason to doubt them, then what you're dealing with isn't just a remnant of the cult's rituals. It's the entity itself, or at least a fragment of it." Clara leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. "A fragment? What does that mean?" Marcus sighed deeply as though reluctant to continue. "Think of it like a shard of glass from a shattered mirror. Each piece reflects part of the whole, but none of them can fully contain it. These entities exist outside our understanding of time and space. When the cult tried to summon one, they inadvertently splintered it into smaller parts. Those fragments were sealed away using artifacts like the discs you found. But if those seals are broken, they come back together, Clara finished, her voice barely above a whisper. And then what happens? Marcus hesitated, his eyes avoiding hers. Chaos, destruction. Anything it touches would be consumed, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. It feeds on fear, despair, anything negative. And once it grows strong enough, it won't stop until everything is done. The room fell silent save for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Clara felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She had always prided herself on being practical, grounded in logic and evidence. But, now faced with something so far beyond comprehension, she realized how powerless she truly was. "Is there any way to stop it?" she asked finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Marcus nodded slowly. "There might be. The cult documented methods to banish the fragments, but they're dangerous, borderline suicidal. One ritual involves returning the artifacts to their original burial site and performing a ceremony tied to the alignment of celestial bodies. Essentially, you'd be reversing the process that brought the entity here in the first place." Clara frowned. "Why hasn't anyone tried this before? Why didn't the cult do it themselves?" "They did," Marcus replied grimly. "Or at least they attempted to. According to the texts, every attempt ended in failure, or worse. The rituals require precision, focus, and absolute belief. Even the slightest mistake could make things exponentially worse. And there's another catch. Someone has to stay behind to complete the ritual. Otherwise, the seal won't hold." The implication hit Clara like a punch to the gut. Someone had to sacrifice themselves to ensure the entity was contained. There was no other way. For a moment, she considered walking away, pretending she hadn't heard any of this. But deep down, she knew she couldn't abandon the people who trusted her to protect them. "Tell me what I need to do," she said firmly. Meeting Marcus's gaze, he studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, but you'll need help. Gather a small team, people you trust completely. You'll also need specific materials, salt, candles, herbs, and a written copy of the incantation. I'll provide everything you need." By midnight, Clara stood at the edge of the cemetery once again, flanked by Marcus and two officers she had reluctantly brought along, Officer Daniels and Detective Rodriguez. Both had proven their loyalty countless times, but even they seemed uneasy tonight. The air was thick with tension, the storm clouds overhead casting an oppressive gloom over the landscape. Together they carried the supplies Marcus had prepared earlier, a bag of coarse salt, bundles of dried herbs, and a stack of handwritten pages containing the incantation. Clara led the group to the freshly dug grave where the discs had been unearthed. As they worked to set up the ritual circle, the wind picked up, whipping through the trees with unnatural force. Leaves swirled around them, and the temperature plummeted, turning their breaths into visible clouds. Daniels glanced nervously at Clara. "You sure about this, Detective? This feels wrong." "It is wrong," Clara admitted, her tone resolute. "But we don't have a choice. If we don't do this, whatever's coming will destroy us all." Once the preparations were complete, the team formed a protective perimeter around the open grave. Clara knelt at the center, placing the discs carefully within the salt circle. Her heart pounded as she lit the candles, their flickering flames casting long shadows across the ground. The symbols on the discs began to glow faintly, pulsating in sync with the rhythm of her heartbeat. "Everyone ready?" she asked, looking at each member of her team. They nodded, though fear was etched into their faces. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began reciting the incantation. The words felt foreign on her tongue, harsh and guttural, yet strangely familiar, as though they had always been buried deep within her subconscious. As she spoke, the ground trembled beneath them. The wind howled louder, carrying with it the sound of distant screams. Shadows danced at the edges of the clearing, twisting and writhing like living creatures. Clara ignored them, focusing solely on the ritual. She repeated the phrases over and over, her voice growing stronger despite the chaos unfolding around her. Then, suddenly, the discs erupted in a blinding flash of light. Everyone shielded their eyes instinctively, but Clara forced herself to keep going. Through the glare, she saw a towering figure emerge from the void, a grotesque amalgamation of darkness and decay, its form constantly shifting and reforming. Its eyes burned with an unnatural red glow, fixing Clara with a gaze that pierced straight through her soul. "You dare defy us?" The entity roared, its voice shaking the earth itself. "You cannot undo what has been done." Clara faltered for a split second, her resolve wavering under the sheer magnitude of the creature's presence. But then she remembered the whispers, the destruction already spreading through the town, and the innocent lives at stake. Summoning every ounce of courage, she shouted the final lines of the incantation, her voice cutting through the cacophony like a blade. The entity screamed in rage, lashing out with tendrils of shadow that tore through the protective barrier. Daniels and Rodriguez scrambled to reinforce the salt line, throwing handfuls of herbs into the air to ward off the encroaching darkness. Marcus chanted prayers under his breath, clutching an ancient amulet tightly in his fist. For a moment, it seemed as though the ritual might fail. The entity surged forward, reaching for Clara with claws made of pure night. She stumbled backward, nearly losing her footing, but refused to break eye contact. With a final, desperate cry, she completed the incantation, slamming her palms onto the glowing discs. A deafening explosion of light engulfed the clearing, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the brilliance faded, the entity was gone, or so it seemed. Clara collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, her body trembling with exhaustion. The others rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. "Did it work?" Rodriguez asked, his voice hoarse. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. A low, guttural growl echoed through the cemetery, reverberating in their chests. Clara turned slowly, her blood running cold as she realized the truth. The entity wasn't defeated. It was merely delayed. "We need to leave." "Now," she ordered, grabbing the bag of supplies and leading the group toward the exit. Behind them, the earth cracked open, revealing a swirling abyss of darkness that pulsed with malevolent energy. Whatever they had unleashed, it wasn't finished with them yet. The group didn't stop running until they reached the safety of Clara's car, parked a short distance from the cemetery. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke, and their breaths came in ragged gasps as they piled into the vehicle. Clara gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, while Daniels fumbled with his seatbelt, still glancing nervously over his shoulder at the dark woods behind them. Rodriguez sat silently in the back seat, clutching the bag of ritual supplies like a lifeline, while Marcus stared blankly out the window, muttering fragments of prayers under his breath. "We didn't finish it," Clara said, finally breaking the tense silence. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a mixture of anger, fear, and determination. "Whatever we did back there, it wasn't enough." Marcus turned to face her, his expression grim. "You're right. The entity isn't gone, it's just contained for now, but containment is temporary. It will find a way to break free again, and next time, we might not be able to stop it." Clara clenched her jaw, her mind racing. They had risked everything, lives, sanity, and possibly their very souls, to perform the ritual, only to realize that the battle was far from over. The entity had been weakened, yes, but it hadn't been banished completely. And worse, it knew them now. It had seen their faces, heard their voices, and tasted their fear. She couldn't shake the image of its glowing red eyes or the sound of its unearthly roar as it clawed its way through the barrier they had worked so hard to create. "What do we do now?" Daniels asked, his voice trembling slightly. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to come after us." "No, we can't," Clara agreed. "But we also can't rush back in without a plan. That thing isn't like anything we've ever faced before. We need to understand it better if we want any chance of defeating it permanently." Rodriguez leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Understand it how? It's not exactly something you can study in a textbook." "He's right," Marcus interjected. This isn't about science or logic, it's about belief. Entities like this thrive on chaos and despair. To fight it, we have to confront it on its own terms. We need to learn its weaknesses, its origins, and most importantly, why it was summoned in the first place. Clara nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Then we go back to the source, the cult. If we can figure out why they created those discs and what they hope to achieve, maybe we'll find a clue about how to destroy it for good. The next morning, Clara assembled her team in a small conference room at the precinct. Maps, books, and photographs covered the table, along with photocopies of the symbols engraved on the discs. Marcus joined them remotely via video call, his face pale and drawn from lack of sleep. Despite the exhaustion etched into everyone's features, there was a sense of purpose in the room, an unspoken agreement that failure wasn't an option. Here's what we know so far, Clara began, pointing to a map of the town. The cult responsible for summoning the entity operated centuries ago. Their activities were centered around this area, particularly near the cemetery where we found the discs. According to Dr. Reed, they performed rituals designed to open portals between worlds, hoping to gain power or knowledge from the entities they believed existed beyond our reality. But instead, they unleashed something they couldn't control, Rodriguez added, shaking his head. And when things went south, they buried the artifacts to seal the portals. Problem solved, right? Not quite, Marcus chimed in. The seals weren't perfect. Over time, natural events, earthquakes, storms, even human interference could weaken them. Someone must have disturbed the grave recently, either intentionally or by accident, which explains why the entity started manifesting again. So what's the next step? Daniels asked, leaning back in his chair. Do we track down more of these artifacts, or try to dig up more information about the cult? All of the above, Clara replied. First, we need to locate the original site of the cult's operations. There might be clues hidden there, ritual tools, journals, anything that could help us understand their methods. Second, we need to keep monitoring the town for signs of further disturbances. If the entity breaks free again, we need to be ready. The team nodded in agreement, though the weight of the task ahead hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just another investigation, it was a race against time, pitting them against forces they barely understood. Failure wouldn't just mean losing their lives. It would mean condemning the entire town to unimaginable horrors. Over the next few days, the group split up to cover more ground. Clara and Daniels scoured local archives, searching for records of the cult's activities. Though much of the history had been lost to time, they managed to piece together fragments of information. Church documents describing strange disappearances, eyewitness accounts of eerie lights in the forest, and cryptic warnings from religious leaders about those who seek forbidden truths. Meanwhile, Rodriguez and Marcus focused on deciphering the symbols on the discs. Using advanced imaging software, they discovered that the patterns shifted depending on the angle of light, revealing hidden layers of meaning. Some of the symbols corresponded to astrological alignments, suggesting that the rituals were tied to specific dates. Others seemed to represent emotions, fear, anger, despair, as though the cult had harnessed human suffering to fuel their magic. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Clara felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, they were making progress, but that hope was short-lived. One evening, as Clara drove home from the precinct, she noticed something unusual in her rearview mirror. A pair of headlights followed her closely, matching her speed no matter how fast or slow she drove. Her heart raced as she took a series of random turns, trying to lose the vehicle, but it remained stubbornly behind her. Finally, she pulled over, to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly as the other car stopped a few feet away. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. Clara squinted through the darkness, unable to make out their face. But before she could react, the figure raised a hand and the world around her dissolved into shadow. When she woke up, she was lying in the middle of the cemetery, surrounded by the same swirling mist she had seen during the ritual. The discs were arranged in a circle around her, glowing faintly, and the whispers returned. Louder this time, almost deafening. Panic surged through her as she realized she wasn't alone. The entity loomed above her, its form shifting and writhing like smoke caught in a breeze. "You cannot run," it hissed, its voice reverberating in her skull. "You are ours now." Clara scrambled to her feet, her mind screaming for her to move, to fight, to do something. But the entity was faster. It lunged toward her, tendrils of darkness wrapping around her arms and legs, pinning her in place. She struggled against its grip, shouting curses and defiance, but it only laughed. A cold, hollow sound that echoed endlessly. Just as she thought all was lost, a bright light pierced through the gloom. Marcus, Daniels, and Rodriguez appeared, at the edge of the clearing, holding flaming torches and chanting in unison. The entity recoiled, hissing in pain as the flames licked at its shadowy form. Clara seized the opportunity, breaking free of its grasp and sprinting toward her team. "Now!" Marcus shouted, tossing her a bundle of herbs soaked in oil. Without hesitation, Clara hurled the makeshift weapon into the center of the circle, igniting the discs in a burst of fire. The entity screamed in agony, its form dissolving into ash as the flames consumed the artifacts. But even as the last embers faded, Clara knew the victory was hollow. The entity was weakened, yes, but not destroyed. Its presence lingered in the air, a promise that it would return. And when it did, they would need more than fire and courage to stand against it. The aftermath of the confrontation left Clara and her team physically and emotionally drained. The cemetery was eerily silent now, the oppressive weight of the entity's presence lifted, for the moment at least. But none of them dared to celebrate. They knew better than to believe this was truly over. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them. Every rustle of leaves, every distant creak of branches swaying in the wind, felt like a whisper from the shadows. Reminder that the entity wasn't gone, just waiting. Back at the precinct, the group convened in the same conference room where they had planned their ill-fated ritual days earlier. Maps and notes were scattered across the table, but no one seemed eager to dive back into research. Instead, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Clara broke the quiet first, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her face. "We stopped it for now," she said, glancing at each member of her team. "But we all know it's not finished. That thing, it doesn't give up. It doesn't forget." Daniels nodded grimly, rubbing his temples. "So what do we do? Keep chasing ghosts? Waiting for it to come back stronger than before?" "No," Clara replied firmly. "We finish what we started. This time we don't stop until it's completely gone." Rodriguez leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "How? We barely survived last time. If we go after it again, we're risking everything, including everyone else in this town." "He's right," Marcus added, joining the conversation via video call once more. His expression was somber, his tone heavy with regret. "The ritual you performed weakened it, but containment isn't enough. To banish the entity permanently, someone has to stay behind to complete the process. Someone has to make the ultimate sacrifice." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them. Clara looked down at her hands, clenched tightly, in her lap. She had known this moment would come eventually. From the beginning, she had suspected that defeating the entity wouldn't be possible without paying a steep price. And now, staring at her friends and colleagues, people who had risked their lives alongside her, it became painfully clear who that price would fall upon. "I'll do it," Clara said finally, her voice soft but resolute. Her declaration was met with stunned protests. Daniel shot to his feet, shaking his head vehemently. "No way, Detective, you're not doing this alone. We stick together. That's how we've made it this far." "Exactly," Rodriguez chimed in. "You think we're letting you walk into that kind of danger by yourself? Forget it." Clara held up a hand, silencing them both. "Listen to me. This isn't just about bravery or teamwork. It's about responsibility. I'm the one who found those discs. I'm the one who disturbed the grave. If anyone has to face The consequences, it's me. But you don't have to die for this, Daniels argued, his voice cracking with emotion. There has to be another way. There isn't, Clara replied gently, meeting his gaze. Marcus is right. The ritual requires someone to stay behind. If I don't do it, the entity will break free again, and next time it might kill all of us. Maybe even everyone in this town. I can't let that happen. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken fears and unresolved grief. Finally, Marcus sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. If you're certain about this, then we need to prepare. There's no room for error this time. Every detail matters. The final ritual took place under the cover of darkness, during a rare celestial alignment that Marcus had identified as crucial to sealing the entity away forever. The team returned to the cemetery, carrying supplies and protective charms. The atmosphere was tense, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Clara walked ahead of the group, her steps deliberate but heavy. Each movement felt like a step closer to the end of her life, yet she refused to show fear. Not here, not now. As they set up the ritual circle, Clara gave instructions to her team, ensuring they understood their roles. Daniels and Rodriguez fortified the perimeter with salt and herbs, while Marcus double-checked the incantation written on fragile parchment. When everything was ready, Clara turned to face them, her heart swelling with gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. "For standing by me, for believing in me. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Tears glistened in Daniel's eyes, but he forced a weak smile. "Just promise us one thing, Detective. Make sure this works. Make sure it's worth." It will be," Clara promised, though her voice wavered. "I won't let it win." With that, she stepped into the center of the circle, positioning herself beside the glowing discs. The symbols pulsed faintly, responding to her presence. Taking a deep breath, Clara began reciting the incantation, her voice growing louder and steadier with each word. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the sound of distant screams. Shadows danced at the edges of the clearing, twisting and writhing like living creatures desperate to break free. Then suddenly, the earth cracked open, revealing a swirling abyss of darkness. The entity emerged once more, its form towering and grotesque, its red eyes blazing with fury. "You dare challenge us again?" it roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of reality. Clara didn't flinch. She continued chanting, her focus unwavering. The entity lunged toward her, tendrils of shadow reaching out to drag her into the void. Behind her, Daniels, Rodriguez, and Marcus worked frantically to reinforce the barrier, throwing handfuls of salt and lighting candles to ward off the encroaching darkness. "You cannot escape your fate," the entity snarled, its claws inches from Clara's face. But she stood her ground, shouting the final lines of the incantation with every ounce of strength she had left. A blinding flash of light erupted from the center of the circle, engulfing the clearing in brilliance. The entity screamed in agony, its form dissolving into ash as the ritual reached its climax. Clara felt the energy surge through her, pulling her toward the void. She glanced back one last time, locking eyes with her team. Their faces were streaked with tears, their expressions filled with equal parts admiration and despair. And then, with a deafening roar, the light consumed everything. Hours later, when dawn broke over the horizon, the cemetery was silent. The ground was scorched black, the ritual circle reduced to ashes. Of Clara there was no trace. Daniels, Rodriguez, and Marcus searched the area thoroughly, calling her name, but she was gone. In the weeks that followed, life in the town slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be. Reports of strange phenomena dwindled, and the sense of dread that had hung over the community began to lift. Yet those who had witnessed the events couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, watching them from beyond. One evening, as Daniel stood at the edge of the cemetery, he thought he heard a faint whisper carried by the wind. It sounded like Clara's voice, soft and distant, murmuring words he couldn't quite understand. He froze, listening intently, but the sound faded as quickly as it had come. Whether Clara had succeeded in banishing the entity or sacrificed herself, only to delay the inevitable, no one could say for sure. All they knew was that she had given everything to protect them, and that knowledge would haunt them forever.